From now on, your pension checks will be deposited directly into my account, and you are forbidden from accessing the bank without my permission. My son Brandon said this to me with a mouthful of steak that I paid for. I looked at him, then I looked at the legal documents he had slammed onto my hand-crafted oak dining table. He thought he was taking control of a senile old man. He had no idea he was declaring war on a master craftsman who knows how to dismantle everything he ever built, piece by piece. Before I tell you how I turned my son's inheritance into a pile of worthless concrete, hit that like button and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not inherited. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. I am Harrison Caldwell, 70 years old, and for 40 years I built furniture for the wealthiest families in Seattle. My hands are rough and calloused, but my mind is as sharp as the chisels I keep in my basement workshop. But to my son Brandon and his wife Tiffany, I am just a wallet that is slowly expiring. It was a Sunday evening and the rain was hammering against the windows of the house I built with my own 2 hands 3 decades ago. We were sitting at the dining table. The air was thick with tension and the smell of the cheap, overcooked steak Tiffany had brought over. She claimed it was premium beef, but I know the difference between a ribeye and a rubber boot. I washed the dry meat down with a sip of a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon from my cellar. It was a smooth, complex wine that was completely wasted on the 2 people sitting across from me. Brandon wiped grease from his chin and pushed a stack of papers toward me. The sound of the paper sliding across the white oak surface made my stomach turn. I spent 3 months planing and sanding this table until it was like glass, and now he was treating it like a desk in a cheap motel. I looked down at the bold letters at the top of the page, General Power of Attorney. I felt a cold spike in my chest, but I kept my face impassive. I took another sip of wine and asked calmly, "What is this, Brandon?" He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the wall behind me as if he was reciting a script he had rehearsed. "It is for your own protection, Dad," he said. "We heard about what happened last week with that phone scammer. You almost gave away your Social Security number. You are getting older, and frankly, you are becoming a liability to yourself." I tightened my grip on the steak knife. A liability. That was the word he used. The truth was very different. A scammer had called me trying to trick me into buying fake gift cards. I knew it was a scam instantly. I had spent 45 minutes on the phone with the guy pretending to be confused just to waste his time and frustrate him. It was my form of entertainment. I had told Brandon about it as a funny story. Now he was weaponizing my sense of humor against me to paint me as incompetent. I looked at Tiffany. She was scrolling through her phone, not even pretending to care, but she chimed in without looking up. "Just sign it, Harrison. It is not a big deal. Brandon is in finance, he knows how to invest your money better than you do. You are letting your savings rot in a low-interest account. It is practically criminal." Brandon is not in finance. Brandon is a project manager who has been between jobs for 6 months and thinks buying cryptocurrency constitutes a career. I knew exactly what this was. They were running out of money. I had seen the new lease on Tiffany's car. I had seen the designer bags she tried to hide when she came over. They were drowning, and I was their life raft. Brandon tapped the paper aggressively. "Look, Dad, I am not asking. From now on, your pension and your Social Security need to be routed to a joint account that I control. You do not need that much cash anyway. What do you spend money on? Wood, tools, old man stuff. We will give you a monthly allowance for groceries and gas. It takes the burden off your shoulders, an allowance. I am 70 years old. I have $500,000 in liquid assets and a house worth nearly $1 million. And my unemployed son was offering me an allowance like I was a teenager. The disrespect was so sharp it physically hurt. My first instinct was to laugh in his face. My second instinct was to throw them both out into the rain and change the locks. I felt the anger rising up my throat like bile. I started to open my mouth to tell him exactly where he could shove his power of attorney. But then I saw Leo. My 10-year-old grandson was sitting at the end of the table. He was pushing peas around his plate with his head down, trying to make himself invisible. He looked terrified. He knew his parents were aggressive. He knew the atmosphere was toxic. If I exploded right now, if I started a war, Brandon would take Leo and I might never see the boy again. Leo was the only good thing that came out of this family. He had my eyes and my patience. Sometimes he would come down to the shop and watch me work for hours without saying a word. For Leo, I would endure anything, even this. I took a deep breath and let the anger settle into a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. I relaxed my grip on the knife. I let my shoulders slump. I deliberately made my hand tremble as I reached for the reading glasses in my pocket. I decided to give them the performance they wanted. If they wanted a senile, helpless old man, I would give them one. "You really think this is best, son?" I asked, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic. Brandon's eyes lit up. He smelled blood. "Absolutely, Dad, trust me. It is the only responsible thing to do." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. I looked at the signature line. This document would give him full legal access to my checking accounts and the ability to make financial decisions on my behalf. It was dangerous. But I also knew something Brandon did not. I knew that the bulk of my wealth was not in the checking account he was targeting. And I knew that a power of attorney can be revoked if you have a good lawyer, which I did. But more importantly, I needed them to think they had won. I needed them to get comfortable. Because when people are comfortable, they get sloppy. And when they get sloppy, they make mistakes. I put the tip of the pen to the paper. I hesitated, acting like I was confused. "Where do I sign again, here or here?" I asked. "Right there, Dad, on the dotted line." Tiffany snapped, impatient to get back to her phone. I started to write my name, Harrison Caldwell. But as I wrote, I subtly changed the angle of the letters. I added a loop to the H that I never use. I skipped the middle initial. To the naked eye, it looked like my signature. To a forensic handwriting expert or a bank teller paying close attention, it would look suspicious. It was a small act of rebellion, a safety valve, just in case I needed to claim later that I was coerced or that the signature was forged. I finished signing and pushed the paper back to Brandon. He snatched it up like a starving dog grabbing a bone. He scanned the signature, and a smug grin spread across his face. He looked at Tiffany and winked. "See, I told you," he said. "Easy peasy." He turned back to me, his tone suddenly dismissive and cold. "Good choice, Dad. We will set up the transfer tomorrow. You do not have to worry about a thing. Now, if you will excuse us, we have to go. Tiffany has an early morning." They stood up, leaving their half-eaten plates on my table. They did not offer to clear the dishes. They did not say thank you. They just took the paper, the key to my freedom, and walked toward the door. Leo lingered for a second, looking at me with sad, apologetic eyes. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. "I love you, Grandpa," he whispered before running after his parents. I sat alone in the dining room, listening to the sound of their car engine fading into the distance. I looked at the empty chair where my son had sat. He thought he had just stripped me of my power. He thought he had turned me into a ghost in my own home. I picked up the glass of Cabernet and swirled the dark red liquid. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the finish. He was wrong. He had not disarmed me. He had just invited me to play a game that I had been mastering while he was still learning to tie his shoes. I stood up and cleared the table. I washed the dishes by hand, feeling the warmth of the water. Then I dried my hands and walked to the hallway. I stood before the large mirror that hung there, framed in cherry wood I had carved 20 years ago. I looked at my reflection. I did not see a victim. I saw a general preparing for battle. I walked to the basement door and opened it. The smell of sawdust and varnish greeted me like an old friend. I walked down the stairs into the darkness of my workshop and pulled the string for the light. The fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the rows of chisels, saws, and planes. They wanted my money. They wanted my house. They wanted to erase me. I walked over to the workbench and picked up a heavy mallet, testing its weight in my hand. Brandon had made the first move, but he had forgotten the most important rule of carpentry. Measure twice, cut once. He had not measured at all, and he was about to get cut. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. "Sarah, it is Harrison. I think it is time we updated my will. And Sarah keeps it off the books. We have work to do." 48 hours. That is exactly how long it took for the occupation to begin. I was sitting in my favorite armchair reading the newspaper when a massive moving truck backed into my driveway. The air brakes hissed like a warning signal. I had not invited them. I had not agreed to this. But Brandon walked through the front door with a confidence that made my stomach churn. He did not knock. He simply unlocked the door with the key I had given him for emergencies only. He called it consolidation. He told me that by giving up their luxury apartment downtown, they could maximize their investment capital, which was his fancy way of saying they were broke and needed a free place to live. He claimed they were doing this to take better care of me, but the predatory gleam in his eyes told a different story. They did not ask where they should put their boxes. They did not ask which room would be convenient for them. They simply marched up the stairs to the master bedroom. That room was the heart of this house. It was the sanctuary I had shared with my wife, Catherine, for 35 years, until cancer took her from me. Since her funeral, I had kept that room exactly as she left it. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand, next to the book she never finished. Her favorite perfume still lingered in the air, a faint scent of lavender and vanilla that gave me comfort on the lonely nights. I slept in the guest room specifically to preserve that space. It was a shrine to the woman who had helped me build this life. I stood in the hallway and watched as the movers began hauling in modern garish furniture that looked like it belonged in a plastic showroom. Then I saw Tiffany. She was standing by the closet holding a heavy-duty black trash bag. My heart hammered against my ribs. She was pulling Catherine's clothes off the hangers. These were not just fabrics. These were memories. The blue silk dress she wore to our son's graduation. The heavy wool coat we bought during our trip to Vermont. The hand-knitted cardigans she made herself. Tiffany was tossing them into the garbage bag with the same casual indifference one would use for expired food. I stepped forward, my hand trembling not from age but from a rage so hot it felt like it would burn my skin. I opened my mouth to shout to tell her to get her hands off those things. But then I saw Brandon watching me. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, waiting for me to snap. He wanted me to be the crazy, emotional old man. He wanted proof that I was unstable. If I lost my temper now, I would play right into their narrative. I swallowed the scream that was clawing at my throat. I forced my breathing to slow down. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Tiffany did not even turn around. She just kept stuffing the silk dress into the black plastic. "Oh, Harrison, Hood, you are here. We need to clear this closet out today. I need space for my yoga gear and my winter collection. Besides, this stuff is ancient. It smells like mothballs and old people. I am doing you a favor, really. Goodwill might take some of it, but honestly, most of this is just trash. Trash." She called 30 years of dignity and grace trash. I looked at the bag. I looked at her manicured nails digging into the fabric. I wanted to throw her out the window. But I thought of the plan. I thought of the phone call I had made to Sarah. I needed them to think I was defeated. I needed them to believe I was their doormat. So I lowered my head and let my shoulders slump. I pretended to be the broken old man they saw. "Just please," I whispered, "be careful with the blue dress." It was her favorite. Tiffany rolled her eyes and tossed the bag into the corner. "Fine, whatever. Just make sure these bags are out on the curb by tomorrow morning. I do not want clutter in my new bedroom. My new bedroom. The audacity was breathtaking. By evening, I had been completely displaced. They told me that the guest room where I had been sleeping was now needed for Brandon's home office. He needed a quiet space to manage his imaginary investments. They told me that the second guest room was for Leo, which was the only decision I agreed with. That left me with one option: the basement. It was not a finished basement. It was my workshop. The floor was concrete. The walls were unfinished drywall and exposed studs. It was cold, damp, and smelled perpetually of sawdust varnish and turpentine. There was no bathroom down there, just a utility sink in the corner, covered in paint splatters. They moved a small cot into the corner behind the furnace. This was my new home. I was a tenant in the house I had built with my own sweat and blood. I was a refugee sleeping next to my table saw. I spent that first night lying on the thin mattress, listening to the footsteps above my head. I could hear them walking around in my bedroom. I could hear Tiffany laughing. I could hear the muffled sound of their television. They were celebrating their conquest. They thought they had won the lottery. They had $1 million home alive in servant and full control of my finances, or so they thought. The next morning, the reality of my new status became clear. I was no longer a father. I was staff. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when Tiffany breezed in wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car. She ignored my greeting and started tapping on her phone. She poured herself a cup of the coffee I had made without asking and took a sip before grimacing. "This is too weak, Harrison," she said, setting the mug down. "We need to get an espresso machine. Remind me to order one using your card today. Oh, and that reminds me. I am hosting a brunch tomorrow for the girls. Some of the wives from the country club are coming over, and I need this place to look presentable." She walked into the living room and pointed at the floor. The floor was a masterpiece. It was reclaimed white oak arranged in a herringbone pattern. I had laid every single plank myself 20 years ago. I had hand-scraped the edges to give it character. I had applied 7 coats of oil, finishing it on my hands and knees until it glowed like amber. It was not just a floor, it was art. "The floors look dull," she declared. "I need you to polish them. And I mean really polish them. I want to be able to see my reflection in them by tomorrow morning. Do not use that cheap stuff from the grocery store. Get down on your knees and use the wax paste. If you are going to live here for free, you might as well be useful." She looked at me expecting resistance. She expected the proud craftsman to balk at being treated like a janitor. She wanted to see me humbled. I looked at the floor. I remembered the summer I laid it. I remembered Leo as a toddler learning to walk on these planks. I remembered dancing with Catherine on this wood on our 30th anniversary. This floor had a soul. Tiffany and her friends did not deserve to walk on it, let alone judge it. But I also knew that the more they treated me like a servant, the less they would suspect me as a threat. Servants are invisible. Servants hear things. Servants see things. If being the janitor gave me access to their secrets, then I would be the best janitor they had ever seen. I looked Tiffany dead in the eye. I masked my hatred with a look of submissive obedience. "You are right," I said. "They have lost their shine. I will take care of it. I will make sure they are perfect for your friends." "Good," she said, turning her back on me. "And try to stay in the basement during the brunch." "No offense, Dad, but you kind of kill the vibe. We will bring you down a plate of leftovers when everyone is gone." She walked away, leaving me alone in the living room. I knelt down and ran my hand over the smooth, cool wood. I could feel the grain under my fingertips. I whispered a promise to the house. I promised that I would restore it. I promised that I would cleanse it of these intruders. I would polish this floor until it was a mirror, and when the time came, I would pull it out from under them so fast they would not even know they were falling until they hit the bottom. I went to the utility closet, and grabbed the heavy tin of beeswax. I had work to do, not for her, but for the timber. 2 weeks turned into an eternity of silence and servitude. I was no longer the master of the house. I was the help. My days fell into a humiliating rhythm that Brandon and Tiffany orchestrated with cruel efficiency. I woke up at 5 in the morning, not to the sound of my alarm, but to the list of chores Tiffany had taped to the refrigerator door the night before. Walk the dog, do the laundry, prep the vegetables for dinner, scrub the guest bathroom. The list was always written in pink marker with little smiley faces that felt more like insults than decorations. I became a ghost in the hallways I had framed myself. I washed their clothes, folding Brandon's expensive shirts that I knew he bought with credit cards he could not pay off. I walked their Pomeranian, a nervous little creature that barked at its own shadow while the neighbors watched me with pity. I could see it in their eyes. There goes Harrison, poor old guy, looks like he is losing it. They did not know the truth. They did not know that every shirt I folded and every floor I swept was just part of the cover story I was building. The degradation reached its peak on a Saturday morning. Tiffany had announced she was hosting a brunch for her inner circle. These were women who wore sunglasses indoors and spoke exclusively in hashtags. They descended upon my house like a flock of loud perfumed birds. I was instructed to stay in the kitchen and manage the hors d'oeuvres. I was not a father-in-law. I was staff. I stood by the granite island arranging mini quiches on a silver platter. My hands, the same hands that could carve a dovetail joint with surgical precision, were now shaking slightly from holding the heavy tray. Laughter erupted from the living room. It was high-pitched and artificial. I walked out holding the tray, trying to keep my head down. The living room was filled with women sipping mimosas and critiquing the decor. "Oh my God, Tiff, this place is huge," one of them squealed. "You are so lucky." Tiffany smiled that practiced, tight smile of hers. She waved a hand dismissively. "It is a lot of work, honestly, but we had to do it." She gestured toward me as I approached with the food. "Ladies, this is Harrison, my father-in-law." The room went quiet. 5 pairs of eyes examined me like I was a piece of antique furniture that had seen better days. "He is a little, you know," Tiffany whispered loud enough for me to hear, tapping her temple with a manicured finger. "Lonesome." Confused. "We had to move in to make sure he takes his meds and does not burn the house down. It is a full-time job, really. I am basically a saint for putting up with it." A chorus of sympathetic AWS filled the room. "You are so brave, Tiff," one of them said. "I could never do it. I would just put him in a home." I stood there frozen. The tray felt like lead in my hands. She was rewriting my history right in front of me. She was painting me as a burden, a senile old man who needed a babysitter. The anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp. I wanted to throw the tray across the room. I wanted to tell them that I built this floor they were standing on. I wanted to tell them that Tiffany did not even know how to change a light bulb, let alone manage a household. But I did nothing. I forced a vacant smile onto my face. I played the part. "Hello, ladies," I mumbled. "Would you like a quiche?" They took the food without making eye contact, treating me with the polite indifference one reserves for a waiter. I turned to retreat to the kitchen, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Then the accident happened. One of the women, a brunette with too much jewelry, was gesturing wildly with her wineglass. She spun around to laugh at a joke, and her hand clipped the edge of the sofa. The glass flew. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the crystal goblet arc through the air. I watched the dark red liquid splash out in a violent wave. It hit the floor. My floor. The Burmese teak floor that I had sourced specifically for its golden hue and water resistance. But red wine is acidic. If it sits, it stains. "Oh no." The woman gasped, hand over her mouth. Tiffany did not ask if her friend was okay. She did not grab a towel. She turned to me and her eyes were cold, hard flint. "Harrison, look what you made her do," she snapped. "You startled her sneaking up like that." I had been 5 feet away walking in the opposite direction. But logic did not matter here. I was the scapegoat. "Get a rag," she ordered. "Now, before it sets." I hurried to the kitchen and grabbed a stack of paper towels and a bottle of specialized wood cleaner I kept under the sink. I rushed back. I started to hand her the towels. She did not take them. She pointed at the puddle of wine spreading across the grain. "Clean it up," she said. I looked at her. I looked at the women watching me. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "I said clean it up," Tiffany repeated, her voice dropping an octave. "Get down there and scrub it. You are the one who cares so much about these stupid floors, right? So save them." The humiliation was a physical blow. She wanted me on my knees. She wanted to assert her dominance in front of an audience. If I refused, I broke character. If I refused, I was the aggressive, ungrateful old man. Slowly, painfully, I lowered myself. My knees popped. My back stiffened. I knelt in the puddle of wine, ruining my trousers. I began to blot the liquid, watching the red stain the paper towels like blood. Above me, the conversation resumed. They went back to talking about Pilates and vacations as if the old man on the floor did not exist. I scrubbed the wood, focusing on the grain, focusing on the work. I was invisible. I was furniture. And because I was invisible, no one noticed when Brandon walked into the hallway just a few feet away. He was on his phone, his back to the party. He did not see me kneeling behind the sofa. I stopped scrubbing. I held my breath. "Yeah, I know the deadline is Friday," he whispered into the phone, his voice tight with panic. "Relax, Tony. I have it under control. The old man is completely out of the picture. I have the power of attorney. I am just waiting for the right moment to liquidate the assets." I froze. My hand hovered over the wine stain. "No, do not hurt him," Brandon hissed. "Look, if you touch him, the police get involved and everything gets frozen. Let me handle it. We are listing the house next week. It is worth at least 800 grand. You will get your money plus interest. Just call off your dogs." I stared at the floor. The wine had seeped into a tiny crack in the wood. It looked like a wound. Brandon hung up and sighed, running a hand through his hair. He adjusted his tie, put on a fake smile, and turned to walk into the living room to greet his wife's friends. He stepped right past me, not even looking down. I remained on my knees. The humiliation of a moment ago had vanished, replaced by a cold, deadly clarity. He was not investing my money. He was paying off a debt to someone named Tony. And he was planning to sell my house, my masterpiece, to save his own skin. I finished cleaning the spot. I stood up, my knees, aching, my pants wet with wine. I looked at the clean floor. I looked at Brandon laughing with the women. "You want to sell the house, son?" I thought. "Okay, I will let you sell it. But you should have checked what exactly you were selling." I walked back to the kitchen and threw the dirty paper towels in the trash. I took out my phone and sent a single text message to my old foreman, Mike. "Get the crew ready. It is time." The next morning, the air in the house felt heavy and suffocating, like the calm before a storm. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe air that didn't smell of Tiffany's overwhelming perfume or Brandon's anxiety. I told Tiffany I needed to walk to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription for my blood pressure medication. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through Instagram, and didn't even look up. She just waved a dismissive hand at me as if she were shooing away a fly. That was her mistake. She assumed I was just a helpless old man running a trivial errand. She forgot that I had a life and secrets long before she ever married into this family. I walked the 3 blocks to the pharmacy, but I didn't stop there. I pulled my collar up against the wind and kept walking. My destination was the downtown post office a mile away. For 40 years, I had maintained a private P.O. box there. It was a remnant from my days running the custom furniture business. It was where I received contracts from high-profile clients who valued discretion. Brandon knew about the business, of course, but he didn't know about the box. He thought all my mail came to the house. He thought he could intercept everything at the curb. He was wrong. I stood in front of box 402, my heart beating a little faster than usual. My hands, which were usually steady enough to carve intricate details into walnut wood, were trembling slightly as I turned the key. The small metal door swung open. Inside was a stack of letters. Most of it was junk, but at the bottom was a thick envelope from the bank. This was not the checking account Brandon had access to. This was the statement for my emergency liquidity fund. This was the money I had set aside for a medical crisis or for Leo's college tuition. It was the safety net I had spent a lifetime weaving. I took the envelope to a quiet corner of the lobby and tore it open. The paper crinkled loudly in the silence. I unfolded the statement and scanned the columns. My eyes stopped halfway down the page. The breath left my lungs in a sharp hiss. There was a withdrawal dated 3 days ago. The amount was $50,000. The transaction description read, BC Capital Management Fees. BC stood for Brandon Caldwell. My son had not invested a dime. He had simply transferred $50,000 of my hard-earned savings directly into his own pocket and labeled it a fee. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just mismanagement. This wasn't just a bad investment strategy. This was theft, plain and simple. He was looting me. He was stripping the copper wire out of the walls before he even sold the building. I looked at the number again. $50,000. That was 4 years of college for Leo. That was a safety net for a major surgery, and he had taken it to pay off his gambling debts or to fund his delusions of grandeur. I walked back to the house with the statement folded inside my jacket pocket. It felt like I was carrying a burning coal against my chest. The walk seemed longer this time. Every step was heavy with the realization that the boy I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and catch a baseball, had become a predator. I was no longer his father. I was his prey. When I entered the house, the silence had been replaced by the sound of typing. I followed the noise to the guest room, which was now Brandon's office. He was sitting in my leather chair, surrounded by 3 computer monitors. The screens were flashing with graphs and charts that I knew he didn't understand. He was playing the part of the Wall Street tycoon. He looked up when I entered, and for a split second, I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes, before he masked it with arrogance. "Hey, Dad, you are back early," he said, turning back to his screens. "Did you get your pills?" I didn't answer. I walked up to the desk and pulled the crumpled bank statement from my pocket. I smoothed it out on the desk right on top of his keyboard, covering his precious charts. I pointed a calloused finger at the line item. "Explain this," I said. My voice was low and steady, but there was a cold edge to it that made him flinch. Brandon looked at the paper. His face went pale and then flushed a deep, angry red. He stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled back and hit the wall with a loud thud. "You went through my mail," he shouted, trying to flip the script. "You have no right to snoop through my business." I slammed my hand down on the desk. "That is not your mail, Brandon. That is my bank statement, and that is my money. You took $50,000. You called it a management fee. What exactly have you managed, son, besides managing to steal from your own father?" He looked at me with pure venom. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. Instead, he laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound that lacked any humor. "You are so old-fashioned," he sneered. "You think money is just supposed to sit in a vault gathering dust. You are pathetic. This is the 21st century, Dad. I am leveraging assets. I moved that capital into crypto. I am doubling your net worth right now while you are standing here crying about a transfer fee. You do not understand how modern finance works. You should be thanking me." Crypto, the magic word for fools who want to get rich without working. He was gambling my life savings on digital coins while he owed money to loan sharks. I looked at him with pity and disgust. "You are not investing, Brandon," I said quietly. "You are drowning, and you are using me as a life jacket." The truth hit him hard. He stepped around the desk and got right in my face. He was taller than me now, and heavier, but he had never looked smaller. He snatched the bank statement from the desk and ripped it in half. Then he ripped it again and again until it was nothing but confetti raining down onto the floor. "You know what he said?" his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This is exactly why you cannot handle your own affairs. You panic over nothing. You wander around town getting confused by paperwork you do not understand. You are becoming a liability, Dad. A danger to yourself." He took a step back and pointed at the door. "From now on, you do not leave this house. Not for a walk, not for the pharmacy, not for anything. If you need something, you tell Tiffany and she will order it. You are grounded. Do you hear me? You are forbidden from stepping foot outside that door without one of us escorting you." I looked at the shredded paper on the floor. I looked at my son, who had just appointed himself my warden. He thought he was exerting control. He thought he was locking me in. He didn't realize that by trapping me inside, he was only giving me more time to dismantle his life from the inside out. I looked him in the eye and gave a slow, resigned nod. "Okay, son," I said, "if that is what you think is best." "Good," he said, turning back to his computer. "Now get out. I have work to do." I walked out of the room and closed the door. I heard the lock click behind me. I stood in the hallway alone. I was a prisoner in my own home. But as I walked toward the basement stairs, I felt a strange sense of calm. He had taken my money. He had taken my freedom. But he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the man who built the walls he was hiding behind. I went down to the workshop. I didn't need to go out to destroy him. I had everything I needed right here. And now that I was under house arrest, I had all the time in the world to prepare for the final demolition. The lock on my door clicked shut, but locks only keep honest people out, and I was done being honest. My son thought that by taking my keys and forbidding me from leaving the house, he had neutralized me. He treated me like a naughty child who had been sent to his room without supper. But he forgot one crucial detail. I built this room. I framed this door, and I knew exactly how to pop the hinge pins from the inside without making a sound. I waited until 3 in the morning. The house was silent save for the rhythmic humming of the refrigerator and the occasional settling of the timber beams. I slipped out of the guest room like a shadow. My destination was not the front door to escape, but the heart of the enemy territory. I went down to the basement first to my workbench. I did not need heavy machinery for this. I needed precision. I grabbed my finest wood chisel, a small drill bit, and a container of color-matched wood filler. In my pocket I had 4 high-fidelity miniature listening devices I had ordered weeks ago when my gut first told me something was wrong. They were no bigger than a quarter, but powerful enough to pick up a whisper from 20 feet away. I crept upstairs to the dining room. The moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains illuminating the oak table where I had signed away my freedom. I knelt beneath it. This table was solid white oak, 2 inches thick. I located the junction where the pedestal leg met the tabletop. With the steady hand of a surgeon, I began to carve. I carefully peeled back a small section of the wood grain, creating a hollow cavity just deep enough to nestle the transmitter. I placed the device inside and then sealed it back up using the wood filler and a touch of stain I kept in my pocket. Within 10 minutes, the hiding spot was invisible. You could run your hand over it and feel nothing but smooth, varnished wood. I repeated the process in the living room, embedding a device into the base of the television stand. Then came the most dangerous part. The master bedroom, my old room. I eased the door open. Brandon and Tiffany were asleep. The sound of Brandon's heavy snoring covered the soft creak of the floorboards. I moved to the large, heavy mirror frame that hung opposite the bed. I had carved that frame myself with intricate floral patterns. It was the perfect camouflage. I slipped a device into a deep groove behind a carved rose petal, securing it with a dab of museum wax. I was in and out in less than 5 minutes, leaving no trace of my presence except for the electronic ears that were now wide awake. I retreated to my basement bunker and put on my headphones. The receiver hummed to life. The audio was crystal clear. Now I just had to wait. I spent the next 2 days living a double life. Upstairs, I was the submissive, confused old man shuffling around in my slippers and nodding obediently when Tiffany ordered me to scrub the toilets. Downstairs, I was the surveillance officer compiling a dossier of evidence that would bury them. The first breakthrough came on Tuesday afternoon. I was in the basement, supposedly taking a nap, when Tiffany's voice came through the headphones. She was in the living room, and she was not talking to Brandon. "I cannot stand it anymore, baby," she whispered. Her voice was husky and flirtatious, a tone she never used with my husband. "It is like living in a nursing home. The old man smells like sawdust and desperation, and Brandon is useless. He is pacing around like a caged animal, sweating through his shirts." I listened as she paused, waiting for a response from the other end. "No, do not worry about the money," she laughed. "We are going to be rich. Once we sell this dump, I am leaving him. I just need to secure my half of the payout first. You and I can finally take that trip to Cabo. Just be patient, Kyle. Brandon is a stepping stone. Once the check clears, he is history." Kyle, her personal trainer. I noted the name and the time in my notebook. So she was planning to divorce Brandon the moment the house was sold. She was a parasite preparing to jump to a new host. But the real bombshell dropped that evening. Brandon was alone in the dining room. I could hear the clinking of a glass, probably scotch, and the heavy thud of him pacing back and forth. His phone rang. "Please, Tony. Give me 1 more week," he pleaded. His voice was trembling, cracking under the weight of fear. I know the deadline is the 31st. I am moving as fast as I can." I turned up the volume. I could hear the muffled shouting on the other end of the line. "No, do not come to the house," Brandon cried out. "My dad is here. Look, I have the power of attorney. The house is going on the market tomorrow. It is $1 million property. Your 200 grand is safe. I will pay you the full amount, plus the VIG. Just do not hurt me." I froze. $200,000. He had not just borrowed a little money for a business venture. He was deep in the hole with loan sharks. He had gambled away his future, and now he was trying to sell my past to save his kneecaps. Later that night, the two of them converged in the kitchen. I listened as they plotted my demise with the casual indifference of people deciding what to order for dinner. "We cannot keep him here while we show the house," Tiffany said. "He scares the buyers. He looks like a ghost." "We will move him out next week," Brandon replied. "I found a place. It is a state-funded facility about 2 hours north. It is cheap." "Cheap," Tiffany scoffed. "Is it clean?" "Does it matter?" Brandon snapped. "It has a bed and a cafeteria. Once we sell the house, we take the cash, pay off Tony, and use the rest to get that penthouse downtown. We will tell Dad the money is in a trust for his care. By the time he realizes the trust is empty, he will be too senile to do anything about it. We just need to get him out of here before he figures out we are selling the furniture too." I took off the headphones. The silence in the basement was heavy, but it was no longer oppressive. It was the silence of clarity. They were not just bad children. They were executioners. They were planning to throw me into a state-run warehouse to rot while they drank cocktails on my dime. They were going to strip this house of everything, even the furniture I had built. I looked at the unfinished chair on my workbench. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and began to smooth the armrest. The rhythm was soothing. They wanted to sell the house. They wanted to move me out. "Excellent," I whispered to the empty room. I would let them proceed. I would let them list the house. I would let them think they had won. Because the higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. And I was going to make sure that when they hit the ground, they would not have a penny left to buy a Band-Aid. It was time to initiate the final phase of my plan. I reached for my phone and texted Sarah, my lawyer. Draft the sales contract, I typed. And make sure the clause about personal property is in bold print. They are ready to sell. And so am I. I told Tiffany I was having chest pains. It was the only way to get out of the house without them asking too many questions. Panic is a great motivator for selfish people because if I dropped dead in the kitchen, right then it would be an inconvenience to their schedule. She called an Uber instead of an ambulance, complaining that she could not drive me because she had a Zoom meeting with her yoga instructor. That was fine by me. The moment the car turned the corner, I told the driver to change the destination. I was not going to the cardiologist. I was going to see the only person left in this city I could trust. Sarah ran a small but fierce law firm in a brick building downtown. She was the daughter of my best friend, who had passed away 10 years ago. I had known her since she was in pigtails, and I had paid for her first year of law school when her father fell ill. She looked at me with horror when I walked into her office. I must have looked terrible. I was wearing my old gardening clothes because Brandon had locked my good suits in the closet to keep me from looking presentable in public. I sat down in the leather chair opposite her desk and placed the shredded remains of my bank statement, which I had taped back together on the glass surface. Then I told her everything. I told her about the power of attorney. I told her about the loan sharks. I told her about the plan to put me in a state facility. Sarah listened without interrupting, but I could see her knuckles turning white as she gripped her pen. When I finished, she took a deep breath and opened my file. She pulled out the deed to my house and the trust documents we had drafted years ago. She studied them for a long time, her eyes scanning the legal jargon with the precision of a hawk hunting a field mouse. "Harrison, this is a mess," she said, finally removing her glasses. "The power of attorney he forced you to sign is broad, extremely broad. It gives him the authority to liquidate assets to pay for your care. If he claims that selling the house is necessary to fund your stay in a nursing home, he can legally do it. We can fight this, of course. We can file an injunction. We can petition the court to revoke the POA based on coercion and elder abuse. We can freeze the assets pending an investigation." She looked at me with hope. She was ready to go to war in a courtroom. She was ready to file motions and subpoenas. But I shook my head slowly. "How long will that take, Sarah?" I asked. She hesitated. "To get a court date. To get a judge to review the evidence. Maybe 3 months. Maybe 6 if his lawyers stall." I leaned forward. 6 months is too long. Brandon owes money to people who do not file motions. They break legs. If I freeze the assets now, they will hurt him. And as much as I despise what he has become, he is still my son. I do not want him dead, want him. I just want him to learn a lesson he will never forget. I need a way to stop him that is faster than a judge and more painful than a lawsuit. Sarah slumped back in her chair, frustrated. "So what do you want to do? You want to let him sell the house?" I looked at the deed on the table. I looked at the blueprints of the house that were stapled to the back of the trust document. I pointed to the architectural drawings. "I want to let him sell the structure," I said, "but I want to keep the house." Sarah looked at me confused. "Harrison, you are speaking in riddles. The house is the structure." "No," I corrected her. "In the world of carpentry and in the world of property law, there is a difference. I need you to look at the definition of fixtures versus chattels." Sarah frowned, but she started typing on her computer. I knew the law because I had dealt with it for decades in my business. A fixture is something permanently attached to the land, like the foundation, the roof, the plumbing. It stays with the house when you sell it. A chattel is personal property like a sofa or a rug. It goes with the seller. Usually things like cabinets, flooring, and staircases are considered fixtures because removing them would damage the property. But my house is different. I built that interior using a technique called Japanese joinery, I explained. No nails, no glue, just interlocking wood connections. The floors are floating. The cabinets are hung on French cleats. The staircase is a self-supporting modular unit. I can dismantle the entire interior of that house with a rubber mallet and a screwdriver without damaging a single inch of the drywall or the foundation. Sarah stopped typing. She looked at me, her eyes widening as the realization set in. Are you saying, she asked slowly, that the interior of your house is technically furniture? I nodded. Legally speaking, if I list these items as personal property in an addendum to the sales contract, they do not convey with the real estate. They belong to me. Sarah started to smile, a slow, dangerous smile that matched my own. And Brandon never reads the fine print, she said. Never, I confirmed. He sees a contract and just looks for the signature line. She began typing furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Okay, Harrison, here is what we are going to do. I am going to draft a sales contract for the house. We will list the property description as the land and the primary structure, but we are going to add a very specific Clause B regarding personal property. We will define the custom walnut flooring, the mahogany cabinetry, the hand-carved staircase, and the wall paneling as modular personal property of the seller. We will state clearly that the seller retains the right to remove all personal property prior to closing. She looked up at me, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. If Brandon signs this, he is legally agreeing to let you strip the house bare. He will be selling a concrete shell. And since the value of your home is almost entirely in the custom woodwork, the appraisal will tank the moment you remove it. But the buyer, I asked. The buyer is likely a front for the loan sharks. Exactly, Sarah said. They will sign whatever Brandon puts in front of them because they think they are getting $1 million asset to cover a $200,000 debt. They won't check the distinction between fixtures and chattels until they walk in and see the pipes sticking out of the wall. She printed out the document. The printer hummed, filling the quiet office with the sound of a trap being set. Harrison, she said, handing me the warm pages. This is risky. If you take out the wrong screw, if you damage the drywall even a little bit, they could sue you for destruction of property. I looked at the contract. I looked at the clause she had highlighted. I spent 40 years building things, Sarah, I said, standing up. I know exactly how to take them apart. I folded the contract and put it inside my shirt. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The legal trap was set. Now I just needed to get back to the house and play the part of the defeated old man one last time. I needed to convince Brandon that I was giving up, that I was ready to sell. I shook Sarah's hand. Thank you, I said. Give them hell, Harrison, she replied. I walked out of the office and hailed a cab. The chest pains were gone. My heart was beating strong and steady. I was going home. Not to live, but to prepare for the greatest demolition job of my career. I would sign their papers. I would let them think they had won. And then I would show them what happens when you try to steal a man's life work right out from under him. The drive back felt short. As the house came into view, I looked at the beautiful oak front door I had carved by hand. Enjoy it while you can, son, I whispered, because soon that door is coming with me. I walked back into the house with the posture of a man who had finally been broken by the weight of his own years. I let my shoulders slump forward and dragged my feet slightly as I crossed the threshold. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, but my audience was too self-absorbed to appreciate the nuance. Brandon and Tiffany were in the kitchen, arguing in hushed tones about money. When they saw me, they stopped abruptly and put on those plastic smiles that made my skin crawl. I sat down heavily on one of the bar stools and let out a long, ragged sigh. I looked at my hands, the hands that had built this house, and then I looked at my son. You win, Brandon, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I am tired. I walked to the pharmacy today, and I got confused on the way back. I forgot where I was for a moment. Maybe you are right. Maybe it is time for me to go to that facility you talked about. I cannot manage this place anymore. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but in that second I saw the sheer, unadulterated joy flash across their faces. It was sickening. They didn't see a father in distress. They saw a jackpot. Tiffany actually clapped her hands together before catching herself and pretending to look sympathetic. "Oh, Harrison," she cooed, walking over to place a hand on my shoulder. "That is such a brave decision. We know how much you love this house, but really it is too much for one person. You will be so much happier where there are professionals to look after you, and don't worry, we will handle the sale. We will take that burden off your shoulders." I nodded slowly, staring at the granite countertop. "Just sell it," I said. "I do not want to deal with showings or negotiations. Just get it done so I can rest." The transformation in their behavior was instantaneous. For the last 2 weeks I had been a nuisance, a stain on their carpet. Now suddenly I was the guest of honor. Brandon poured me a glass of water with ice in it. Tiffany asked if I wanted a pillow for my back. They were practically tripping over themselves to keep me happy, to keep me compliant. They needed that signature, and they would play whatever role necessary to get it. The very next day, the buyer arrived. Brandon had moved fast, faster than I expected. This wasn't a standard real estate listing. There was no for sale sign in the yard. This was a private deal arranged through back channels. The man who stepped out of the black sedan was not a realtor. He wore a suit that was too expensive and a watch that cost more than most people's cars, but his eyes were cold and dead. He introduced himself as Mr. Vance, representing a private investment group. I knew better. He was the collector. He was here to assess the collateral for Brandon's debt. I sat in the corner of the living room pretending to doze off while Brandon led Mr. Vance around. I watched through half-closed eyes as the man inspected the house. He wasn't looking at the view or the layout. He was looking at the materials. He ran his hand along the wainscoting in the hallway. He tapped his knuckles against the solid mahogany built-in bookshelves. "Incredible craftsmanship," Mr. Vance muttered. "You don't see wood like this anymore. This isn't veneer. This is solid stock." Brandon beamed, puffing out his chest as if he had built it himself. "Exactly. My father was a master carpenter. He imported most of this timber himself back in the 80s. The floors are Burmese teak. The cabinets are Brazilian cherry. The value isn't just in the square footage. It is in the finish." Mr. Vance nodded, clearly impressed. He walked into the kitchen and admired the custom cabinetry. He looked at the intricate molding around the ceiling. He did the math in his head. "We can offer $1.2 million, he said flatly. "As is. Cash offer. We can close in 48 hours. Brandon nearly choked. He had been expecting $800,000. $1.2 million was his salvation. It was enough to pay off the loan sharks, give Tiffany her divorce settlement, and still leave him with a tidy sum. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. "We have the paperwork ready. My lawyer sent it over this morning. That was my cue." Sarah had emailed the contract to Brandon earlier that day, labeled simply as Standard Sales Agreement. Brandon had printed it out without even reading the file name, let alone the content. He brought the stack of papers over to the coffee table and gestured for me to come over. "Dad, this is it," Brandon said, his voice trembling with greed. "Mr. Vance made a very generous offer. We just need your signature here, and we can get you moved into your new room by the weekend." I stood up slowly and shuffled over to the table, but I put on my reading glasses, taking my sweet time cleaning the lenses with my shirt tail. I could feel Brandon's impatience radiating off him like heat waves. He was tapping his foot on the floor, my floor. I looked at Mr. Vance. "You like the house, sir?" I asked. "It is a masterpiece," Mr. Vance replied. "The woodwork is exceptional. That is what we are paying for, really. The structure is standard, but the interior is art." I smiled a sad, tired smile. "Thank you. I put a lot of heart into this place." I looked down at the contract. It was the document Sarah had drafted. I flipped to the back page where the addendums were listed. There it was in standard 12-point font. Addendum B, Personal Property Retention. The clause stated clearly that the seller, Harrison Caldwell, retained sole ownership of all non-structural interior elements, including but not limited to millwork flooring cabinetry and decorative finishes, and reserved the right to remove said items prior to possession. It was legal dynamite sitting right there in plain sight. But greed is a powerful blinder. Brandon was so focused on the $1.2 million figure at the top of the page that he didn't care about the bottom. I hesitated, holding the pen above the paper. "Are you sure this covers everything, son?" I asked. "I don't want any trouble later." Brandon rolled his eyes and guided my hand to the signature line. "It is a standard contract, Dad." Sarah looked it over. "It is fine. Just sign it so Mr. Vance can get the process started." I looked at Tiffany. She was biting her lip, eyes fixed on the pen. "Okay," I whispered. "If you say so." I pressed the pen to the paper. This time I didn't use a shaky hand. I signed my name clearly and firmly. Harrison Caldwell. With that signature, I wasn't selling my home. I was authorizing the greatest magic trick of my life. I was selling them the box, but keeping the gift that was inside. "Excellent," Mr. Vance said, snatching the papers the moment I finished. "We will transfer the funds to the escrow account tomorrow. We take possession on Monday." Monday. That gave me 3 days. 3 days to undo 40 years of work. Brandon walked Mr. Vance to the door, shaking his hand vigorously. When the door closed, Brandon let out a shout of victory. He grabbed Tiffany and spun her around. "We did it!" he yelled. "We are free. 1.2 million, baby. We are rich." He turned to me, and for a moment I thought he might actually thank me, but he just smirked. "Go pack your bags, Dad. I will drive you to the nursing home on Sunday night. We need the house empty for the new owners on Monday morning." I nodded and walked toward the basement stairs. I did not look back. I did not feel sad. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. They were celebrating a victory that existed only in their imagination. They thought they had just sold a palace. They had no idea they had just sold a cave. I went down to my workshop and closed the door. I took out my phone and dialed Mike. "It is done," I said. "The contract is signed. Bring the boys. Bring the trucks. We start at midnight." I hung up and looked around at my tools. The saws, the drills, the pry bars. They had built this house, and now they would liberate it. I sat down on my stool and waited for the sun to go down. The performance was over. The demolition was about to begin. The tail lights of the Uber carrying my son and his wife faded into the evening mist, and for the first time in months, the air in my house felt breathable. Brandon had practically skipped out the door, dragging a suitcase that cost more than his car payment. He was flying first class to Hawaii, using a credit card he likely planned to pay off with the proceeds from the house sale. Before he got into the car, he had turned to me one last time, not to say goodbye or to tell me to take care of myself, but to issue a final command. "Have your boxes packed by Sunday night, Dad," he had said, checking his reflection in the car window. "We will drop you off at the facility on our way back from the airport. Do not make this difficult." Tiffany had just laughed, blowing a kiss to the house as if she were a queen leaving her castle for a royal tour. She did not look at me at all. I stood on the porch until the car turned the corner and disappeared. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the lonely silence of an abandoned old man. It was the heavy, charged silence of a coiled spring about to snap. I turned around and walked back inside, closing the heavy oak door behind me. I locked it. Then I slid the deadbolt. Then I engaged the security chain. I was not locking the world out. I was locking myself in with my mission. I walked to the center of the living room. I stood on the herringbone floor I had laid 30 years ago. I looked at the coffered ceiling I had installed while balancing on scaffolding 12 feet in the air. I looked at the built-in bookshelves that held the history of my life. Brandon saw dollar signs when he looked at these things. He saw leverage. He saw a quick payout. He did not see the sweat, or the blood, or the love. He did not understand that you can sell a building, but you cannot sell a man's soul. And this wood was my soul. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hand was steady. My heart was beating with a slow, rhythmic thud, like a hammer striking a nail. I scrolled through my contacts, past the doctors and the pharmacies, until I found a number I had not called for a job in 5 years. Mike, my old foreman, the man who had stood beside me when we built this house from the ground up. I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. "Hello," a gruff voice answered. It sounded like gravel crunching under tires. "Mike, it is Harrison," I said. There was a pause on the other end, then a shift in tone. "Harrison. It has been a long time. Is everything okay? I heard you were having some trouble with the boy. The grapevine in the construction world is faster than the internet." Mike knew. He probably knew more than I had told him. "The trouble is over, Mike," I said, my voice flat and hard. "I signed the papers today. The house is sold." Silence. I could hear the background noise of a television in Mike's house. "I am sorry to hear that, boss," Mike said quietly. "I know what that place means to you." "Do not be sorry," I interrupted. "I sold the house, Mike, but I kept the furniture. And according to the contract I signed, the furniture includes the floors, the cabinets, the staircase, and the paneling." Another pause. Longer this time. Then I heard a low rumble that turned into a chuckle. "You pulled a fast one, didn't you, Harrison?" "I did," I confirmed. "But I have a problem. I have to vacate by Monday morning. I need the crew, Mike. I need the old team. I need the guys who know how to use a pry bar without leaving a scratch." I heard the sound of a chair scraping against a floor as Mike stood up. "How much are we taking out?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "If it is wood, it goes. If it is screwed in, it comes out. If it is glued, we dissolve it. I want this place stripped down to the studs and the slab." "I will make the calls," Mike said immediately. "Put the coffee on, boss. We will be there in an hour." I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee. Then I went down to the basement and changed out of my old man clothes. I took off the cardigan and the slippers. I put on my work boots, my canvas trousers, and my tool belt. I strapped on my knee pads. I felt the weight of the hammer on my hip, and for the first time in a long time I felt like myself again. 45 minutes later I saw the lights. They came in a convoy. 5 heavy-duty pickup trucks rolling down the quiet suburban street like a battalion of tanks. They did not park in the driveway. They backed up onto the lawn right up to the front porch. The engines cut out and the doors opened. 10 men stepped out. They were not young men. They were men with gray beards and silver hair, men with backs that were stiff in the morning and hands that looked like leather. These were men who had built half the luxury homes in Seattle before their knees gave out. They were my crew, my brotherhood. Mike walked up the steps first. He was a bear of a man holding a heavy crowbar like it was a toothpick. He looked at me and nodded. Then he looked at the house. "It is a shame to take it apart," he said. "It is beautiful work." "It is a rescue mission, Mike," I replied, opening the door wide. "We are not destroying it. We are saving it from people who do not deserve it." The crew filed into the hallway. They carried toolboxes, stacks of moving blankets, dollies, and power drills. They did not speak much. They did not need to. They walked around the room, touching the walls, inspecting the joints, nodding in appreciation of the craftsmanship they had helped create decades ago. They knew where the hidden screws were. They knew which panels were floating and which ones were locked. They knew the secrets of this house because they were the keepers of those secrets. I stood in the center of the foyer and clapped my hands once. The sound echoed through the high ceiling. The men turned to look at me. "Listen up," I said, my voice echoing slightly. "We have 72 hours. The new owner takes possession on Monday. The contract states that I retain ownership of all personal property. We are going to interpret that definition very liberally. We start with the easy stuff: the kitchen cabinets, the bathroom vanities, the built-ins. Then we move to the floors. Remember, this is tongue and groove white oak. Do not split the tongues. We number every plank on the back so we can reassemble it later. Finally, we take the staircase. It is modular, so find the lag bolts under the treads." One of the men, a wiry electrician named Sam, raised his hand. "What about the lights, boss? The chandeliers?" "Take them," I said. "Cap the wires safely, but take the fixtures. Leave them the bulbs if you want, but the brass comes with us." Mike looked around the grand living room. "And the fireplace mantle?" he asked. "It is hand-carved walnut. It is hung on a cleat," I said. "Lift it up and it pops right off. Take it." The men nodded. There was a collective shifting of weight, a tightening of belts. They were not just laborers tonight. They were repo men taking back a masterpiece. "Where do you want us to start?" Boss Mike asked. I looked at the staircase, the beautiful sweeping curve of wood that had been the backdrop for so many family photos. I looked at the floor where my son had learned to crawl. I looked at the walls that had held my family safe. "Start with the kitchen," I said. "My daughter-in-law hates that kitchen anyway. Let's see how she likes it when it is just a set of pipes sticking out of the drywall." The sound of drills whirring to life filled the air. It was a mechanical symphony. The sound of destruction usually carries a note of sadness, but this was different. This was the sound of liberation. I walked over to the first cabinet, took out my screwdriver, and began to turn. The first screw came out with a satisfying squeak. I held it in my hand, feeling the cold steel. We worked through the night. We worked with a rhythm that only comes from decades of experience. There was no shouting, no confusion, just the steady hum of industry. Piece by piece, plank by plank, the house began to disappear. We were not vandalizing the property. We were surgically removing its soul. And as the pile of carefully wrapped wood grew in the back of the trucks, I felt lighter and lighter. My son was in Hawaii drinking cocktails, thinking he was a millionaire. He had no idea that back home his inheritance was being disassembled one screw at a time. The sound of the first plank coming up was not a crack or a splintering noise. It was a soft, mechanical click. To the untrained eye, a hardwood floor is a permanent fixture nailed down and glued tight to the subfloor. But I am not a standard builder, and this was not a standard floor. When I laid this white oak 30 years ago, I designed a custom interlocking system inspired by ancient Japanese temple construction. It relied on tension and precision rather than adhesive. I knelt down with my pry bar and located the keystone plank in the corner of the living room. With a gentle nudge, it popped loose. I lifted it, feeling the weight of the solid timber in my hands. It was still perfect. The grain was smooth and warm. "One down," I whispered. 3,000 to go. The crew fell into a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. We were not a demolition team swinging sledgehammers and creating clouds of drywall dust. We were surgeons performing a reverse transplant. We moved across the room in a wave, lifting the floor row by row. Each plank was numbered on the back with a grease pencil wrapped in protective foam and carried out to the waiting trucks. Underneath the warmth of the oak lay the cold gray slab of the foundation. With every row we removed, the room grew colder, and the acoustics changed. The warm, inviting absorbency of the wood was replaced by the harsh echo of concrete. I moved to the kitchen. This was my pride and joy. The cabinetry was made from solid Honduran mahogany, a wood so dense and rich it felt like stone. Brandon had bragged to the buyer about these cabinets. He had told him they were worth $50,000 alone. He was right. And that is exactly why they were leaving. I opened the cabinet doors and located the mounting screws hidden behind the false backs. I had installed these using a French cleat system, a method where the cabinet hangs on a beveled strip of wood attached to the wall. It is incredibly strong, but it also means the cabinets are not technically built into the wall. They are hanging on it. I backed the screws out one by one. The drill whirred softly. Mike and 2 other men stepped in to support the weight. On the count of 3, we lifted. The entire bank of upper cabinets came away from the wall with a heavy sigh. Behind them, the drywall was unpainted and white, marked with my pencil calculations from decades ago. We lowered the cabinets onto moving dollies. I ran my hand along the smooth finish. I remembered the Christmas Eve I finished these. Catherine had been baking cookies on the counter while I installed the hardware. She had told me it was the most beautiful kitchen she had ever seen. I was not stealing these cabinets. I was rescuing them. I was saving them from a woman who would have painted them white to match some trend she saw on social media. We worked through the night. The sun came up and went down again. We drank gallons of black coffee and ate sandwiches standing up. Sleep was not an option. We were fueled by adrenaline and a sense of righteous justice. The most difficult task was the staircase. It was a sweeping, curved structure that connected the foyer to the second floor. To a layman, it looked like it was part of the skeleton of the house. But I knew better. I had built it in my shop and assembled it here in 3 large sections. It was held together by massive steel lag bolts hidden under the stair treads. Sam and the boys set up a gantry crane in the foyer. I spent 4 hours underneath the stairs, lying on my back, unscrewing the bolts that anchored the stringers to the floor joists. My arms ached and sawdust fell into my eyes, but I didn't stop. When the final bolt came free, the staircase settled onto the temporary supports with a groan. We hooked it up to the crane and slowly, carefully lowered the sections. The foyer, which had once been grand and welcoming, was suddenly just a tall, empty shaft. The space where the stairs had been was now a gaping hole leading to a ledge 20 feet up. It looked dangerous. It looked wrong. It looked perfect. We didn't stop at the big things. We took the solid wood doors off their hinges. We unscrewed the brass door handles. We removed the crown molding. We carefully pried the wainscoting off the hallway walls, leaving the drywall paper torn and exposed. In the master bathroom, I knelt before the gold-plated toilet fixtures. Brandon had laughed at them, calling them gaudy, but the buyer had loved them. I took a wrench and disconnected the water supply. I unbolted the porcelain from the floor. A few minutes later, the toilet was gone, leaving only an open sewer pipe stuffed with a rag to block the smell. As we worked, memories assaulted me from every corner. I took down the window frame in the reading nook. This was where Catherine used to sit on rainy Sundays, watching the water run down the glass. I could almost see her ghost sitting there sipping tea. I was dismantling the stage where the play of my life had taken place. It hurt. I will not lie. It felt like I was erasing my own history. But then I would think of Brandon's smirk. I would think of Tiffany throwing Catherine's clothes into a trash bag, and the pain would turn into cold resolve. They wanted the asset. They wanted the location. They did not care about the home, so I was taking the home with me. By the 48th hour, we were exhausted. My hands were blistered and my back felt like it was on fire. But we were done. I stood in the center of what used to be the living room. The transformation was terrifying and absolute. The warm golden glow of the oak was gone. The rich red of the mahogany was gone. The soft curves of the molding were gone. The house was naked. It was no longer a home. It was a gray concrete cave. The floor was rough, dusty cement stained with construction markings from 40 years ago. The walls were scarred and full of holes where the cabinets and paneling used to be. Pipes jutted out of the walls like severed arteries. Electrical wires dangled from the ceiling where the chandeliers had hung, looking like dead vines. The echo was unbearable. Every footstep sounded like a gunshot. The air smelled of dry dust and exposed insulation. I walked to the spot where the fireplace mantel used to be. Now there was just a black hole in the wall and the rough brick of the chimney chase. I looked up at the second floor. Without the staircase, the upper level was inaccessible, a ledge leading to nowhere. Mike walked up to me, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead with a rag. He looked around the shell of the house and let out a low whistle. "We got it all, boss," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the empty space. "Every stick of wood. Every screw. The trucks are loaded and strapped down." I nodded slowly, looking around one last time. It was ugly. It was industrial. It was exactly what a concrete box is before a craftsman breathes life into it. "You know, Mike," I said, my voice raspy from dust and fatigue, "when I built this place, I told Catherine that a house is just a frame. It is what you put inside that matters." Mike nodded. "Well, Harrison, you sure proved that today. This place has no soul left." "That is the point," I said. "The soul is in the trucks. This is just what they paid for: real estate, square footage, location." I walked to the front door, or rather the opening where the front door used to be. We had taken the solid oak door and the frame, leaving just the rough opening covered by a piece of plywood we would screw in place from the outside. "Let's go, Mike," I said. "I want to be far away when they open that plywood." We walked out into the cool night air. The convoy of trucks was heavy laden with the spoils of my life. I climbed into the passenger seat of Mike's truck. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was back there. A $1 million mistake waiting to be discovered. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The surgery was a success. The patient had survived, but the body was left behind. Monday morning arrived with a deceptive brightness. The sky was a piercing blue, and the sun beat down on the pavement with a cheerful intensity that felt completely out of place given the devastation waiting inside number 42 Oak Creek Drive. I was sitting in the exact center of what used to be the living room. My throne was a white plastic lawn chair I had bought for $5 at a hardware store. My scepter was a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. The room around me was a gray cavern. The morning light streamed in through the glassless window frames, casting long, harsh shadows across the scarred concrete floor. It was cold inside. Without the insulation of the wood paneling and the rugs, the house held a damp chill that seeped into your bones. But I did not feel the cold. I felt a burning anticipation. I heard the taxi pull up to the curb at exactly 10 o'clock. I did not need to look out the window to know it was them. I could hear Brandon's booming laugh all the way from the street. It was the laugh of a man who thinks he has cheated the system. A few moments later, I heard the click-clack of Tiffany's high heels on the driveway. They were moving fast, eager to finalize the deal and collect their check. They were probably already spending the money in their heads. I heard Brandon mention the Porsche dealership. He was talking about colors. He wanted silver. Tiffany wanted black. They were debating leather interior options while walking toward a house that no longer had an interior. They reached the front porch. I had removed the plywood sheet I had installed for security over the weekend, leaving the rough opening where the front door used to be exposed. From the angle of the walkway, they could not see straight in immediately. They probably thought the missing door was some sort of maintenance issue, or perhaps the new buyers had started early renovations. "Honey, why is the door gone?" I heard Tiffany ask, her voice tinged with annoyance rather than alarm. Brandon laughed dismissively. "Who cares? Maybe the movers took it off to get the big furniture out. The new owner can buy a door. We are just here to hand over the keys." "Wait, we don't even have keys anymore, because there is no lock. This is hilarious." He stepped through the opening. Tiffany followed right on his heels, clutching her designer handbag and adjusting her oversized sunglasses. They stepped from the bright sunlight into the dim gray box. The reaction was not immediate. It takes the human brain a few seconds to process an image that completely contradicts reality. Brandon took 2 steps onto the concrete slab. He looked left toward the dining room. He looked right toward the study. He looked up at the ceiling where the chandelier used to hang. He stopped. His suitcase dropped from his hand and hit the concrete with a loud, dry thud that echoed through the entire hollow structure. Tiffany walked into his back. "Oh, Brandon, move! Why did you stop?" she complained. Then she looked up. The scream that tore out of her throat was primal. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of loss. It was the sound a materialist makes when their god is destroyed. Her hands flew to her face, knocking her sunglasses onto the dirty floor. She spun around in a circle, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. "Where is it?" she shrieked. "Where is the house? Where are the walls? Oh my God. Brandon, we have been robbed." She began to hyperventilate, clutching at her chest. "Someone stole the house. How can someone steal a house?" "Call the police, Brandon. Call 911. Brandon did not move. He was paralyzed. He was staring at the gaping hole where the staircase used to be. His eyes traced the jagged line of bolts on the wall where the stringers had been anchored. He looked at the kitchen where only the rough plumbing pipes jutted out of the wall like truncated limbs. He was pale. All the color from his Hawaiian tan seemed to drain out of his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The slurping sound was magnified by the acoustics of the empty room. It cut through their panic like a knife. Brandon turned his head slowly toward the sound. He saw me. I was sitting there, legs crossed, calm as a monk in meditation. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was trembling. "Dad, what happened? Who did this?" I lowered the cup and looked at him. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. "Nobody did this to us, son," I said. "I did this." Tiffany stopped screaming and stared at me with pure hatred. "You," she hissed. "You crazy old man. You destroyed it. You smashed everything with a sledgehammer, didn't you? You are insane. We are going to have you committed. You ruined the sale." I shook my head gently. "I didn't smash anything, Tiffany. I am a builder, not a vandal. I simply moved out. Just like you asked." Brandon took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. He looked ready to strike me, but the absurdity of the situation kept him frozen. "Moved out," he yelled, his voice cracking. "You took the walls, Dad. You took the floors. You took the toilet. That is not moving out. That is stripping the place." I placed my coffee cup on the floor beside my chair. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the contract they had signed 3 days ago. I unfolded it and held it up. "You should really learn to read the fine print, Brandon," I said. Addendum B. The seller retains all personal property. I told you that this house was built with a modular system. The cabinets, the floors, the stairs, even the paneling. They were all classified as furniture. Chattels, not fixtures. You signed the paper saying I could take my furniture with me. So I did. Brandon snatched the paper from my hand. He stared at the paragraph, his eyes darting back and forth as he read the words he had been too greedy to check. His knees actually buckled. He staggered back and leaned against the rough drywall for support. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no. This cannot be real. Vance is coming in an hour. He is transferring the money at noon." I smiled. It was a cold smile. "I don't think Mr. Vance is going to transfer anything, Brandon. He offered $1.2 million for a luxury home with custom millwork. What you have here is a concrete shell. I had an appraiser friend walk through this morning just for fun. He estimates the current value of the structure at about $200,000. Maybe less given that there is no functional plumbing or electricity. 200,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Brandon slid down the wall until he was sitting on the dirty concrete. He put his head in his hands. $200,000 wouldn't even cover the interest on his debt. He was finished. Tiffany looked from Brandon to me and back again. The realization hit her. The money was gone. The Porsche was gone. The penthouse was gone. "You did this on purpose," she screamed, lunging toward me. "You set us up. You knew we needed that money." I looked at her without blinking. "I knew you were trying to sell my life's work to pay for your mistakes," I said. "I knew you were planning to throw me into a state facility and forget about me. I just made sure that I took what was mine." "The house is still here, Tiffany. The roof is sound. The foundation is solid. You have walls. You have a floor. You just don't have the luxury you didn't earn." Brandon looked up. His eyes were wet with tears of terror. "Dad, please. You have to put it back. You have the stuff right. It is on a truck somewhere. We can fix this. Just bring it back. If Vance sees this, he will kill me." I stood up and picked up my plastic chair. I folded it with a snap. "I am afraid that is impossible, son," I said. "The trucks are already 2 states away. The furniture is going into storage for a project I am planning. It is not coming back." I walked toward the door, stepping over Brandon's legs. He reached out to grab my ankle, but I stepped aside. "Mr. Vance will be here soon," I said, looking at my watch. "I suggest you come up with a very good explanation. Or maybe you should start running. I hear Hawaii is nice this time of year, if you can afford the ticket back." I walked out into the sunshine, leaving them in the gray gloom of their own making. Behind me, I heard Brandon start to sob. It was a pathetic sound, but I didn't turn around. I had a new life to build, and I was done dealing with the demolition of the old one. The rage that had been simmering behind Brandon's eyes finally boiled over. He did not see a father anymore. He saw the architect of his destruction. He let out a guttural roar that echoed off the bare concrete walls and lunged at me. His hands were reaching for my throat. His fingers curled into claws. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched him come. I had anticipated this moment just as I had anticipated every other step of this demolition. Before he could bridge the 3 feet of space between us, the front door opening was suddenly filled with dark uniforms. 2 police officers who had been waiting in their patrol car just down the street rushed in. I had called them 10 minutes ago, reporting a potential domestic disturbance involving a volatile family member. My timing, as always, was precise. One officer tackled Brandon mid-stride, slamming him onto the unforgiving concrete floor. The sound of his expensive suit tearing against the rough surface was audible. "Get down on the ground," the officer shouted, pinning Brandon's arm behind his back. Brandon struggled, screaming about how I was a thief, how I had stolen his house, but the officer was not interested in real estate disputes. He was interested in the young man trying to strangle a 70-year-old senior citizen. Tiffany shrank back against the wall, her hands over her mouth, trembling violently. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing that the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had completely inverted. I stood calmly near my plastic chair and took a sip of my coffee. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and clear. "That is my son. He is upset because the house did not meet his expectations. I would prefer not to press charges for the assault if he calms down, but I do need him removed from the property." The officer hauled Brandon to his feet. He was panting, his face scraped and bleeding slightly from the concrete. He looked wild. "He stole everything," Brandon yelled, spit flying from his mouth. "Look around you. He stripped the house. Arrest him." "That is a civil matter, sir," the officer said, tightening his grip on Brandon's arm. "Right now, you are the one committing assault." At that moment, the sound of clicking heels cut through the tension. Sarah walked in through the open doorway. She was wearing a sharp navy blue suit and holding a black leather portfolio. She looked like a shark entering a tank of goldfish. She stepped over the debris on the floor and nodded to the officers. "I am Mr. Caldwell's attorney," Sarah announced. She walked straight up to Brandon and Tiffany. She did not look intimidated. She looked bored. You seem confused about the situation, Sarah said, opening her portfolio. Let me clarify things for you so we can avoid any further theatrics. She pulled out the signed contract, the one with Brandon's signature, scrawled hastily at the bottom. She pointed to Addendum B with a perfectly manicured finger. The contract clearly states that the seller retains all personal property, she explained, her voice echoing in the empty room. Now, normally in real estate, walls and floors are considered fixtures. However, Mr. Caldwell's home was unique. The interior was constructed using a modular independent system. The paneling was not glued to the studs. The flooring was a floating system. The cabinetry was hung on cleats. Legally speaking, these items were not part of the structure. They were furniture. Large, complex furniture, but furniture nonetheless. She turned the page. You signed this agreement acknowledging that the sale included the land and the structural shell only. Mr. Caldwell exercised his right to remove his personal property before the closing date. He has done exactly what you agreed to in writing. Brandon stared at the document. He looked like a man trying to read a map in a foreign language while his car was sinking underwater. But there is nothing left, he stammered. It is just a cave. Exactly, Sarah said, snapping the portfolio shut. That is what you bought, a concrete shell. We had an independent appraiser look at the property this morning based on its current condition. Without the custom millwork, without the flooring, without the luxury fixtures, the value of the property is basically just the land and the foundation. The appraisal came in at $280,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade, $280,000. Tiffany let out a small whimper. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the dirty floor, her designer dress ruined. She began to do the math out loud, mumbling like a madwoman. $1.2 million, she whispered. We promised Vance $1.2 million. If the house is only worth $300,000, we are short. We are short almost $1 million. She looked up at Brandon, her face drained of all color. Brandon, they are going to kill us. Brandon stood there, swaying slightly. The adrenaline of his anger had evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard dread of reality. He looked at the empty space where the staircase used to be. He looked at the holes in the wall. He realized finally that he had been outplayed. He had tried to hustle a man who measured his life in millimeters, and he had lost everything. I can fix this, he whispered, his voice trembling. I can explain it to them. I will tell Vance that my dad is crazy, that he vandalized the place. Insurance will cover it. Sarah shook her head. No insurance company will cover the legal removal of property that you signed away, Brandon. And Mr. Vance is not an insurance adjuster. He is a businessman who expects a return on his investment. As if summoned by his name, a sound cut through the silence. It was a ringtone, a generic upbeat melody coming from Brandon's pocket. Brandon froze. He did not reach for the phone. He just stared at his pocket, as if it contained a live grenade. Answer it, son, I said softly. It is rude to keep your business partners waiting. Brandon reached into his pocket with a shaking hand. He pulled out the phone. The screen lit up the gloomy room. The name on the caller ID was just 4 letters. Tony, the loan shark. The man who did not care about legal definitions of fixtures versus chattels. The man who only cared about the $1.2 million he had been promised by noon today. Brandon looked at me. His eyes were wide with terror. He looked like the little boy who used to come running to me when he scraped his knee. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to step in and save him like I always had. Dad, he whispered, please, help me. I looked at him. I remembered the way he had looked at me when he threw the power of attorney on the table. I remembered the way he had laughed about putting me in a state facility. I remembered Tiffany throwing Catherine's clothes in the trash. I took a sip of my coffee. I am just a senile old man, Brandon, I said. What could I possibly do? The phone kept ringing. It was loud and insistent. Brandon's thumb hovered over the answer button. He looked at Tiffany, who was sobbing silently against the wall. He looked at the police officers who were watching with a mix of confusion and pity. Then he looked at the empty gray box that was supposed to be his salvation. He pressed the green button and put the phone to his ear. "Hello, Mr. Vance," he squeaked. I could hear the voice on the other end. It was not shouting. It was low, calm, and terrifying. "I am outside, Brandon," the voice said. "Open the door. We have business to conclude." Brandon lowered the phone. He looked at the open doorway where the sunlight was pouring in. A black sedan had just pulled up behind the police car. The rear door opened. Brandon turned to me one last time. "I am dead," he said. I did not answer. I just watched. The lesson was over. The tuition had been expensive, and now the final exam was walking up the driveway. The black sedan did not just park, it arrived with the ominous finality of a hearse. The engine cut, and for a moment, the only sound in the world was the ticking of the cooling metal. Then the door opened, and Mr. Vance stepped out. He was a man who moved with the heavy confidence of someone who owned the pavement he walked on. He adjusted his silk tie, checked his diamond-encrusted watch, and walked toward the gaping hole where the front door used to be. Two other men stepped out from the car behind him. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing leather jackets and expressions of bored violence. Brandon stood in the center of the gray concrete room, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a sleeve that was already ruined by dust. He tried to compose himself, to find the charming smile that had gotten him through life so far, but his face was a mask of terror. When Mr. Vance stepped across the threshold, his expensive Italian shoes made a gritty crunching sound on the debris-laden floor. He stopped. He took off his sunglasses, slowly revealing eyes that were cold and dead. He looked at the exposed studs. He looked at the sewer pipe jutting out of the bathroom floor. He looked at the dangling wires where the chandelier had been. "Is this a joke?" Mr. Vance asked. His voice was not loud. It was soft and smooth like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. Brandon stepped forward, his hands held up in surrender. "Mr. Vance, please listen. There has been a misunderstanding. My father, he is mentally unstable. He stripped the house. He took everything. But the location is still prime. The land is worth a fortune." Mr. Vance did not look at Brandon. He walked over to the wall and ran a finger along the rough, torn drywall paper. He looked at the copy of the contract that was still lying on the floor where I had dropped it. He picked it up and read the addendum. He chuckled, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "This contract says you sold the structure minus personal property," Mr. Vance said. He looked around the empty shell. "It looks to me like you got exactly what you signed for. The problem, Brandon, is that I did not lend you money based on the value of a concrete bunker. I lent you money based on a luxury asset." He dropped the paper, and it fluttered to the ground, landing near Brandon's feet. "My appraiser is sitting in the car," Mr. Vance continued. "He says this shell is worth maybe 300 grand on a good day. You owe me 1.2 million. The math does not work, Brandon, and I hate it when the math does not work." Brandon fell to his knees. "I will pay you back," he sobbed. "I promise. I will get a job. I will work day and night. Just give me time." Mr. Vance sighed and signaled to the two men in leather jackets. They stepped forward, filling the room with their bulk. "We do not have time," Mr. Vance said. "You are going to come with us, Brandon. We need to have a serious conversation about debt restructuring. And by conversation, I mean you are going to work off every cent you owe. It might take you the rest of your life, but we are very patient." The two men grabbed Brandon by the arms. He screamed a high-pitched sound that echoed painfully off the bare walls. He dug his heels into the concrete, trying to resist, but he was powerless against them. Tiffany, who had been cowering in the corner, suddenly stood up. The survival instinct of a rat on a sinking ship had kicked in. She smoothed her dress and walked toward the door, giving Brandon a look of pure disgust. "I am done," she announced, her voice shrill and shaky. "I did not sign up for this. I am not going to be dragged down by a loser who owes money to the mob. Brandon, I want a divorce. Consider us separated as of right now." She tried to walk past Mr. Vance, acting as if she were simply leaving a bad party. She thought she could just walk away from the wreckage she had helped create. She thought she was free. But Sarah stepped into her path. My attorney was smaller than Tiffany, but in that moment she looked 10 feet tall. She held up a thick manila envelope. "Not so fast, Mrs. Caldwell," Sarah said firmly. "You are not going anywhere just yet." Tiffany tried to step around her. "Get out of my way. I have nothing to do with his debts. This is not my problem." Sarah pressed the envelope into Tiffany's chest, forcing her to take it. "The debt is his problem," Sarah said. "But this is yours. You are being served with a lawsuit for elder abuse, emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Tiffany laughed nervously. "You are joking. You have no proof. It is just his word against mine." Sarah smiled and pointed to the corner of the room where a tiny hole in the drywall was visible. "Mr. Caldwell installed high-definition cameras and microphones throughout the house weeks ago," Sarah explained. "We have everything, Tiffany. We have you throwing his late wife's clothes in the trash. We have you verbalizing your plan to dump him in a state facility. We have you conspiring to sell his assets. We have hours of footage of you verbally abusing a senior citizen. The district attorney is very interested in the tapes. You are not going to Cabo, Tiffany. You are going to court." Tiffany's face crumbled. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the realization that her life as a socialite was over. She dropped the envelope and covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the two men had dragged Brandon to the doorway. He was kicking and screaming, his heels scraping lines into the dust. He looked back at me. His eyes were wide with desperation. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad, do not let them take me. Help me. I am your son. Please, Dad, pay them. You have the furniture. You have the money. Save me." I stood there by my plastic chair. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant hand. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to intervene, to write a check, to offer the furniture, to do whatever it took to save my child. He was my flesh and blood. I remembered holding him when he was a baby. I remembered teaching him to fish, but then I remembered the power of attorney. I remembered the theft. I remembered the way he had looked at me when he told me I was a liability. I remembered that he was a grown man who had made a series of choices that led him to this exact moment. If I saved him now, he would never learn. He would just wait for the next bailout. I looked at him and I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was a tear of mourning, not for the man he was, but for the man he could have been. "I cannot help you, son," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "You chose this road. You signed the papers. You sold the house. Now you have to pay the price." Brandon screamed again, but the men dragged him out into the bright sunlight. Mr. Vance looked at me one last time. He nodded slowly, a gesture of respect from one ruthless man to another. Then he turned and walked out. I watched as they shoved Brandon into the back of the black sedan. I watched as the car drove away, disappearing down the street where he had learned to ride a bicycle. He was gone. The room was silent again, except for Tiffany's weeping in the corner. Sarah walked over to me and placed a hand on my arm. "Are you okay, Harrison?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath. The air in the house was cold and stale. There was nothing left here for me. The walls were just drywall. The floor was just concrete. The memories had been extracted, and the ghosts had been exorcised. "I am ready, Sarah," I said. I picked up my coffee cup and poured the remaining cold liquid onto the floor, a final libation for the house that was. I walked toward the door. I stepped over the threshold and out into the warmth of the sun. The breeze felt good on my face. I walked down the driveway past the spot where my wife used to plant tulips. I walked to the curb where Sarah's car was waiting. I did not turn around. I did not look back at the gray, hollow shell. I left Tiffany to her lawyers and Brandon to his fate. I was 70 years old, but as I opened the car door, I felt strangely young. I had a truck full of wood waiting for me. I had a grandson to protect. And I had a new masterpiece to build. The past was demolished. The future was waiting to be framed. 6 months have passed since I walked away from that concrete box. I am sitting on my porch now, looking out over the stillness of Silver Lake. The air here smells of pine needles and damp earth, not suburban desperation. Behind me stands a small cabin. To a stranger driving by, it might look modest. It is just a simple timber frame structure nestled in the woods. But if you were to walk inside, you would stop and stare. Because inside this humble shell lives the heart of a palace. The floors beneath my feet are the same white oak planks I laid 30 years ago. The kitchen cabinets are the same Honduran mahogany I rescued from the wall. I did not just build a house here. I performed a resurrection. The silence here is healing, but it does not mean I am cut off from the world. I still get updates from Sarah. The news about Brandon was difficult to hear, but not surprising. When the police dug into his finances, they found more than just gambling debts. They found a web of wire fraud and money laundering schemes he had concocted to pay off the loan sharks. He thought he was a financial wizard, but he was just a desperate criminal in a suit. He is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. I visited him once. We spoke through a glass partition. He looked older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow defeat. He asked me why I did it. I told him I did not do anything to him. I simply stopped letting him do things to me. He cried. I walked away. It is a tragedy to lose a son, but it is a greater tragedy to lose yourself trying to save him. And Tiffany, the woman who thought she was too good to breathe the same air as me. Sarah tells me she is working double shifts at a diner in the city. She lives in a studio apartment that is smaller than my old walk-in closet. She is paying off legal fees and trying to stay afloat. I wonder if she remembers the way she made me scrub the floor on my knees. I wonder if her feet hurt after a 10-hour shift standing on hard tile. I do not wish her harm, but I do believe in the balance of the universe. She wanted to be served, now she is serving others. It is a poetic justice that needs no further comment. But the greatest victory of this entire ordeal is not my freedom or their punishment. It is the boy standing next to me at the workbench. Leo. After the arrest, Sarah helped me petition for custody. With his father in prison and his mother financially unstable and facing neglect charges, the judge agreed that the best place for a 10-year-old boy was with his grandfather. We are in the new workshop now. It is smaller than the old one, but the light is better. The afternoon sun slants across the workbench, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Leo is holding my favorite smoothing plane. It is a heavy tool made of iron and rosewood, but his small hands grip it with determination. We are working on a piece of white oak, part of the surplus I brought from the old house. I place my hand over his, guiding the angle. Push through, I tell him gently. Don't force it. Let the blade do the work. He pushes. A long curl of wood shaving spirals up from the board, thin as paper, and smelling of vanilla and tannin. Leo picks up the shaving and marvels at it. It is so smooth, Grandpa, he says. I nod and brush the sawdust from the board. I look him in the eye. Listen to me, Leo. This wood is like a person. You see this grain. You see these knots and these lines. This is the character. This is the strength. It was here long before we cut the tree down. Some people try to cover this up with thick paint or shiny varnish. They want everything to look perfect and plastic on the outside, like your father and mother did. They cared about the shine, but the shine scratches, the paint peels, And if the wood underneath is rotten, the whole thing collapses. But if the core is good, if the grain is straight and true, you don't need the paint. You just need to be who you are. The value is on the inside, Leo. It is in your code. It is in your actions. Never let anyone tell you that your worth comes from what you own or what you wear. It comes from what you can build and how you treat the people you love. Do you understand? Leo nods. I think he does. He is already a better man than his father ever was. A few weeks ago, I drove past the old property on Oak Creek Drive. I didn't go because I missed it. I went because I needed to close the final chapter of a book I had been writing for 40 years. The for sale sign was still there, weather-beaten and leaning crookedly in the overgrown grass. The house, or rather the concrete carcass I left behind, had sat on the market for nearly a year. Without the custom millwork, the imported flooring, and the soul I had breathed into it, it was just a cold, echoing liability. I heard from a neighbor that the bank eventually foreclosed on it after Mr. Vance's investment group realized there was no equity to recover from Brandon. They auctioned it off last month. It sold for $215,000, essentially the value of the dirt it sat on. That number, $215,000, was the final validation of my life's work. It proved once and for all that the millions of dollars my son thought he was inheriting didn't come from the location or the market trends. It came from my hands. It came from the labor he despised. But the past has a way of trying to claw its way back into the present. Last Tuesday, a beat-up sedan rattled up the gravel driveway of my cabin. I was on the porch sanding a new rocking chair, Leo sitting beside me reading a book. When the car door opened, I saw Tiffany. She looked different. Older, tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a waitress uniform that had seen better days. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hungry, desperate look that reminded me of a coyote in winter. She walked up the steps, her eyes scanning the cabin. I could see her calculating the value of the timber frame, the solid oak door, the copper gutters. Even in her ruin, she was still appraising. "Harrison," she said, her voice attempting a sweetness that curdled in the fresh air. "And Leo, my baby." She reached out for him. Leo didn't move. He didn't run to her. He didn't hide behind me. He just looked at her over the top of his book with a gaze that was terrifyingly calm. "What do you want, Tiffany?" I asked, not setting down my sandpaper. I miss my family," she said, though her eyes were fixed on the new truck parked in the driveway. "I heard you're doing well. I heard you're selling furniture again. Custom pieces for that architect downtown." Word travels fast. "I am. What of it?" "I'm struggling." "Harrison." She let out a sob that sounded practiced. "The legal fees, the debts Brandon left me with. I'm Leo's mother. If you have money now, don't you think you should help the mother of your grandson, just a small loan, until I get back on my feet?" I stood up, dusting the sawdust from my pants. The old Harrison might have written a check just to make her leave. The old Harrison might have felt guilty. But the man standing on this porch had dismantled a house with his bare hands. "You aren't struggling because of Brandon," I said, my voice low and level. "You are struggling because for 10 years you thought you were too good to work. You are struggling because you measured your worth by what you could take, not what you could make." "I am his mother," she shrieked, the mask slipping. "You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I replied. "I am raising the son you ignored. I am feeding the boy you saw as an accessory. You are welcome to visit Leo under the court-mandated supervision, but you will never see a dime from me again. This wood," I tapped the rocking chair, "is paid for with sweat. If you want money, Tiffany, I suggest you go find some sandpaper and get to work." She stood there, mouth open, realizing the bank was permanently closed. She looked at Leo one last time, waiting for him to beg her to stay. Leo closed his book. "Grandpa is right," he said quietly. "You should go, Mom. We have work to do." She turned and fled, her tires spinning in the gravel. As she drove away, the silence returned to the lake, deeper and sweeter than before. I looked at my grandson, this boy who was learning that dignity is built, not bought. I picked up my sanding block. Ready to finish this, Leo? Ready, Grandpa. We went back to work. The grain of the wood was straight and true, and for the first time in a long time, so was the future. I look around my cabin. It is quiet. It is peaceful. I have my tools. I have my grandson. And I have my dignity. I spent a lifetime building a fortune, only to realize that the only things worth keeping were the things I could carry in my heart and in my truck. I am Harrison Caldwell. I am a carpenter. And I finally finished my masterpiece. It is not a house. It is a life lived on my own terms. Do not ever let anyone take away your value, even if that person is family. Blood is a biological connection, but respect is a choice. You have the right to say no. You have the right to protect what is yours. And sometimes the only way to build a new life is to dismantle the old one piece by piece. If my story gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, then my work here is done. The most important lesson here is that boundaries are not acts of aggression. They are acts of self-preservation. Harrison did not punish his son out of malice. He allowed his son to face the natural consequences of his own greed. Many of us are taught that family loyalty means enduring abuse or enabling destructive behavior, but true love requires accountability. By removing the safety net, Harrison forced his family to finally face reality. It is never too late to reclaim your dignity and your assets. Being a parent does not mean being a victim. You can love your children without financing their corruption. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales of justice and resilience. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to make a tough decision to protect your peace. See you in the next video.